This is not your regularly scheduled Talking in Stations episode. We are, in fact, waiting with much anticipation for the upcoming interview with CCP Rise that was recorded this morning. Instead, what we're going to be doing is playing the video from last week's episode, which did not air live to Twitch for various technical reasons. And then once we have all digested and listened to the CCP Rise interview, which will be released later tonight, we will be recording Talking in Stations Season 3, Episode 13 tomorrow at 23:59 Eve time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, if that's your location. But here, before we get rolling with the video from last week, we have Matterall to give you a sneak peek of the interview with CCP Rise.
Hey, Artimus. Yeah, I just want to tell you guys we did an interview with CCP Rise talking about the Sino changes that are upcoming. And we got a lot of interesting information out of him. And also how this change fits into the greater chaos era that CCP is doing these days. That and more, we'll get that podcast out to you later tonight. And then on Sunday, you'll see the actual video.
All right, well, I am definitely looking forward to it. I've listened to a little bit of it with the bit that was released to the crew, and it's definitely worth a listen. So you can wait with the rest of us for that to finish editing and go live to talkinginstations.com. And while you're waiting, enjoy watching the video from Talking Station Season 3, Episode 11, A Pandemic History. OBS is recording. All right. This is Talking in Stations Season 3, Episode 10. It is currently April 8th or 9th, depending on your time zone, if I remember correctly. And I, as always, am Artimus Albosa, a member of Pandemic Horde. Joining me today, we have RonUSMC, a member of Test Alliance Please Ignore.
Hey guys. Yeah, it's like August, I thought. Yeah,
What month did I say?
April. But you know what?
Wow.
It's super close. Really
I got the
close.
first letter right.
Yeah.
All right, and also joining us today, as always, we have Silver Suspiria, a member of Federation Uprising.
Hey all, and I was also confused, thought I fell back into a time warp or lost time or abducted by aliens.
Saved a lot of money skipping that whole Christmas period, but oh well. A special guest, or on loan from the Sunday show, we have Elise Randolph, a member of Pandemic Legion.
Hey, how's it going? Happy to be here. It's a different time than I'm used to, but I like it. It's a little bit darker outside. Kind of got a better vibe.
Talking in Stations After Dark. Also joining us on the show today, we have a guest, Manfred Sidious, who is currently a member of Test Alliance Please Ignore.
Hello all, glad to be here. Yeah. I'm CEO of a corporation called Havoc, and
Awesome. And the main topic on the agenda for today is actually Pandemic Legion. We're continuing our series of sort of history lessons, so to speak, on the major players in EVE Online, or the minor players, just interesting characters, so to speak. And today we're going to be talking about Pandemic Legion, what used to be, and depending on your perspective, still is, the boogeyman of EVE Online. So let's rewind the clock, though, go back to the beginning. Where did PL start? And Elise, you've been with PL for how many years?
So I've been, man, it's hard to think actually how long I've been with, but I haven't been with PL from the very, very start. PL started really in earnest in 2004, and by then I was kind of just a middling player in EVE Online. But the very beginning areas of PL were a guy, Seamus Orzaz, who had played in beta, decided that, hey, I'm tired of getting bullied around by by all these guys around space, because he was kind of getting griefed by pirates and stuff. So he's like, you know what, I'm going to make my own corporation. So he and his roommate made a corporation called Sniggerly. Kind of failed a little the first few times they tried it out, but eventually in 2004 it stuck. They moved out to Curse, and they started to kind of mine the resources in that area. At the time, Nullsec was kind of a super spooky space. having a battleship was a hashtag big deal. I don't know if people can really kind of imagine that if you haven't played EVE Online for 20 years, 16 years, or however long it's been around. But yeah, in the very beginning, having a battleship was like, whoa, you've got a battleship. Holy crap. People would mine in frigates. They do a whole bunch of like goofy stuff. And, if you lost your cruiser or something, it would be weeks and weeks of work down the drain. So these guys, they lived in Curse, which is NPC space, and they mined some like that super elite ore that you're not supposed to have access to in Empire, and they just built up a little war chest that way and started bumbling around, learning PvP, and making a name for themselves.
Awesome. Now, quick clarification question. So they formed Sniggeredly. Did they immediately form the Alliance then in 2004, or was it just this corp roaming around doing their thing, which eventually morphed into the PL we know today?
Eventually, it morphed into PL that we know today around 2007, I believe. That's our 2007 is our official birthday, so kind of bumped around, didn't do too much. And in 2007 is when the alliance kind of formed in earnest, right? So they were fighting some people. They're having a really good time fighting them, and PL or Sniggerly at the time was, just beating up on their enemies, getting beat up as well, and eventually one of the people that they were fighting says, "Hey, I want to join you guys." Back then, in the early days of EVE, forming an alliance was something that a lot of people did with just standings rather than an actual alliance. And so, when groups wanted to merge, they would form alliances. As the structure would eventually come out to form alliances, they'd form alliances, and that's what happened. So PL formed an alliance with some of the people they were fighting. Ended up picking up some kind of big names and big names that people will probably remember forever. One of the names is Shadu. Shadu ended up being someone that they were fighting, and Shadu was tired of the side that he was on because they kept making mistakes. So he's like, you know what? I'll join these guys. I'll bring my group over and join these guys. And that group was Northeastern SWAT, and that's really when PL kind of became a big player in earnest.
So we looking back at my notes here, there's actually you mentioned before Shadu joined, PL did take part in one of the major nullsec wars. You described it as quote unquote Delve 1, which is an interesting name. There are a lot of wars which PL has taken part in Delve, but I guess we'll get to the rest of them later. But I'm curious, what was Delve 1? You described it as like the first big nullsec war. What was it about?
So I think actually Delve 1 was after PL formed as a proper alliance. I'm not sure uh, if Shadu was in then or not. But basically, and I think Manny was around for Delve One as well, so maybe he can hop in as well. But Delve One was basically Eve's first big war, right? So it's when everyone on the server, it felt like, was at war with another. It was Band of Brothers and their group chilling in the south versus Morsis Mihi and the people that lived in the north. These guys in Band of Brothers, they were players from the beginning of the game. They kind of seemed to have a leg up over everyone. They had all the resources. They lived in Delve, which at the time was like the best system. They had the the coolest clothes and stuff like that. They actually had ships that would outrange you, right? So they had like they were just literally so much better at the game that they could sit and snipe you at a range that you couldn't snipe back because they had all the good gear, and so it just felt helpless going against them. But there's a few things that happened. Some people made some friends and some enemies, we should say, on the Eve Online official forums on COAD Coalition. I think it's the Coalition and Alliance Organization Discussion Forum, which was basically the early days of Eve Online, where we didn't have the Eve subreddit, we didn't have Scrap Heap Challenge or anything like that. All of the trash talk was on the official Eve Online forum. So Coad, as it was called, was like this horrible cesspool. Like people made people made enemies there, and eventually they led to war. And Pandemic Legion and Sniggerly chose to go on the side against Band of Brothers, who they deemed to be like the big bad guys, right? Manny, you were around. You were actually part of the big bad guys, right? Or was that later?
I started out in Firmasixian, which was like an ally or pet, choose your vernacular of Bob's and our Band of Brothers. And I was an FC there, and then midway through the war, I think I joined Outbreak, and then we were kind of independent, but we fought Bob a lot. But yeah, it was the first really big war, and like Elise said, PL were involved, and the North, which was more Sismihi and Razor, and some other alliances, uh, Iron, which was Imperial Republic of the North, and etc. And then you had Red Alliance and the fledgling upstart ruffians, Goon Swarm, uh, involved. Back then, they just used to, like, their gimmick was to just like throw ships at people until they just overwhelmed them and won, and it was quite entertaining to take part on either side.
So,
What
So
kind of doctrines were people flying back then?
yeah, I was just gonna ask, what did war
Yeah.
look like back then, and how does that differ from what we see today?
Oh, so it was sniper battleships. Everything was sniper battleships. You didn't have Logi the way that you do now. What you would do is you would have Logi at a safe spot. You'd warp your sniper battleship fleet in at long range, the longest range that you could operate at, and you would sit there and trade like an old school, I don't know, like battleship.
Muskets.
Yeah, it was.
Hmm.
You'd line up and shoot each other, and if you could manage to warp out, you'd warp out, and then you go to the safe spot, and the Logi would patch you up, and then you'd come back in and repeat. And so there was a lot of tactics to it and stuff, but it's definitely different than the way we fight now. Um, Goons, uh, they were really low skilled, so they would be in cruisers and frigates and pretty much pitchfork fleets, but they would just reship a billion times until they won or until the enemy ran out of ammo. So that was interesting. And PL were kind of this elite group that really started to formulate tactics in Eve versus just the whole standard musket lines like Ron was saying. And so PL really refined a lot of what everybody did through coaching them up.
Eve was almost like a completely unimaginable place. It was like completely different from what you are talking about now, right? So when Manny says people took long range battleships, it's not like everyone was in an apocalypse, right? You, as an FC, you would form a fleet, um, and you would say, "We're taking long range battleships. We're taking sniper battleships." People would take a Raven, they would take a Megatron, they'd take a Dominix, they'd take whatever ship hull they wanted, and they would just put long range guns on it. Like that was literally how it worked, right? It wasn't like, oh, you have to fly this exact Armageddon with this fit. It was, oh, just take something that's got long range. Here's an example fit that you can use, but do whatever you want. There was no homogenous fleet doctrine. That didn't start until way, way later in EVE Online. It didn't even really exist in Delve 2. And so the region Band of Brothers had such like this massive early advantage, so it felt like they had like Tech 2 guns and Tech 2 ammo when other people were still using named. They weren't even using best named because best named was just so expensive. Literally, if you wanted prototype Gauss guns, rail guns for your Megathron, each gun would cost like a quarter of a hull of a battleship, which at the time was something that people couldn't easily replace. Right? You're talking about people just putting like meta 3 guns on a battleship and just going to town and sniping
wow.
people. And so Band of Brothers had this advantage because they had a little bit more. They were more refined, right? They were like the guys that got the game, quote unquote. And so yeah, a lot of it was simply just uh, tanked sniper battleships, and the person that came in at the very end would have this huge advantage because they would get to dictate the range. And Band of Brothers always felt like they had a leg up on everyone because they could shoot out to further ranges with their Tech 2 ammo and stuff. Many hinted at the origins of Goonswarm back in the day, and they were very similar to, if you've played EVE Online for a while, like the early side, or the early days of Brave Newbies, or the early days of Test Alliance, where these very passionate dudes would come in. They don't really care about wins or losses. They don't care about anything. They just want to have fun. So the big recruiting thing for Goonswarm, and sort of like the early narrative spinning was, um, your ammo cost more than my ship. And so Goonswarm, that was their rally cry. They didn't care if they died. They'd get in a rifter. They'd mic warp drive out of battleships. Sometimes a lot of them would die. But every once in a while they'd catch one. And then, the fleet would descend upon them, kill that guy, and then move forward. So,
Wow.
you're talking about early goons where they just they had a very different identity than they do now. Like current Goon Swarm, they seem, obviously they're very refined. They've got FCs, they have end game content. But in the beginning, where everyone starts, they were just these happy-go-lucky kind of goofy dudes who literally they just wanted to start shit with you, and then uh, just take whatever ships they had, and just swarm you with it. It was their MO. And if you've been around a while, you see the very similar start to how Test Alliance started, right? When Dreddit was first in Alliance, I remember watching them undock in like a bunch of Atrons and just going to town on stuff, and having fun. Same with Brave Newbies. I remember the very first time I saw Brave Newbies, they were playing station games with someone. Some guy was in a battleship killing like a couple frigates. And I was like, I wonder how this is gonna end up. Like this guy's just gonna kill this frigate. So they'd shoot this frigate, and then 60 more would just instantly undock and they'd swarm on him, and they would engage under gate guns, and they'd like half of them would all die, but eventually they got their target. So it's really cool to see how these newbie organizations start up and grow, and the impact that they eventually have on EVE Online, right? So Goonswarm, they left an indelible mark on EVE Online. Same with Test Alliance and Brave Newbies.
So you've got the plucky, bright-eyed upstarts of Greenswarm Federation allied with the, which at this time were still considered to be elite, more tactically minded Pandemic Legion versus, and other allies of course, versus Band of Brothers who had the better gear, they quote unquote got the game. Did Band of Brothers were they able to utilize those advantages to win, or did the plucky upstarts and the tactically minded elite players manage to win out?
Oh no! So Band of Brothers completely dominated that conflict. Right?
Nice.
It was just utter devastation. The guys didn't have a chance. And it does make it seem like PL were really good at the game back then. PL were garbage, right? We didn't kind of understand the intricacies of the game. We still hadn't really found our identity at the time. The big players were like Band of Brothers and their allies versus the people from the north, RonUSMC and the likes of those guys. Like those were like the big FCs who could throw around these big numbers. PL and our little ragtag group of whatever it is, we kind of stayed on the fringe most of the times. We like camped pipes. We did harassment stuff. We did join on the big strategic objectives, but more or less we were just these guys on the sidelines, right? But we kind of made a lot of friends in the north at the time, right? So Imperium Vuklau, the leader of the Northern Coalition, um, the Northern Coalition is kind of an odd thing that we kind of have to take a tangent on, unfortunately. As Manny was saying, the group that lived in the north, they were just a confederation of different alliances, but they united under a common banner and called themselves the Northern Coalition. They were kind of like the quote unquote good guys. They were the counter to the bad guys of Band of Brothers in the early days. Eventually, what ended up happening is they ended up becoming, if we fast forward in the history of Eve a little bit, they ended up becoming the big bad, and the alliance that everyone knows now as Northern Coalition. They made that that name, Northern Coalition, kind of to mock the Northern Coalition. So when we talk about Northern Coalition, very different people involved. than the Alliance Northern Coalition dot.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of some of the stuff that Elise was talking about, um, yeah, so the early days was just very ragamuffin as far as what people fought with. There's a very wide variety. Um, it like the first semblances of fleet comps were probably when Titans started getting used a little bit more, and you'd have the AOE Doomsday. Um, Battleships had like 1DD or 2DD proof fits, and that was kind of like where everybody had to fit this way in order to be able to survive a Doomsday, which at the time, Doomsdays were quite different from what we know them to be today. They were in AoE, kind of like a smart bomb, but it was 200 kilometers wide, and it did 75,000 damage of the racial type. So Amar, EM, et cetera, et cetera. So that was like the first semblance of kind of a fleet comp where you were expected to fit a certain way. But the true first fleet comp that I can really recall was actually created by PL. It was after the changes to logistics and things like that, when they came up with a comp called Armor Hacks and completely took Eve by storm. And I'll just serve that up to Elise.
Armor hacks. I'm sorry, that's what everyone thinks of now when they hear the word armor hacks. Armor hacks.
Yeah, that's the ubiquitous sound of Shadu yelling at an FC saying, "You're doing it wrong. These are armor hacks," and that's definitely like a little soundbite that I think everyone remembers. And so,
Oh yeah.
but yeah, Manny actually he talks about something that's quite important, right? So doomsdays. The reason that we talk about in Delve 1 and Delve 2, the only real doctrines that people use being these sniper battleships is because they were the only ships that could survive the blast of a single AoE doomsday, right? So kind of a huge deal, right? When you're talking about conquering space, uh, Titans were still quite rare, and one of the things that you would do with them is you would keep them on a strategic objective, like a Sino Jam or a player-owned starbase that you wanted to keep up. You'd uncloak it Doomsday, and everyone on the grid would die, right? And it took out bubbles as well, right? And Hictors didn't exist in the game, so they were very definitely like this huge uh, like this huge tactical weapon that you would wield around. And Band of Brothers had more of them than anyone else, so it made it quite tricky to work around. But yeah, so you take these sniper battleships that would have uh, a whole bunch of plates slapped on them, so they would survive one Titan, and then eventually we changed the fit so they would survive two Titans, and then this is something that kind of Shadu became notorious for, because it was like this huge dropping a Titan was a huge thing, and you had to make sure that your enemies didn't warp off and were engaged. So oftentimes Shadu would take his Titan, which as it stands right now is I think the oldest Leviathan currently in the game, because or the earliest built Titan in the game. He's got a Leviathan. And what he would do is he'd start FCing a fleet, and then after a while, go a little bit quiet, and you're like, huh. Someone else would take over, and then you'd see his Sino go up out of fleet, and his Titan pop up, and you might get a fleet warp to get your fleet off, but oftentimes you didn't. And he would just make that, he would make that decision. Well, they've got way more than we do on the field right now. It's worth it if I nuke our fleet as well as the enemy fleet, just to make sure the enemy fleet dies.
Everyone's dying.
Yeah, exactly. So he was very very well known for killing blues at the time, back in the day, right? In the later end of his EVE Online career, he was made kind of more known for being friends with a lot of people. But back then, he killed his fair share of blues, right? But it was tactically an important thing. But yeah, so Manny was talking about armor hacks, right? So that kind of does skip a little bit ahead of time if you look at just the EVE Online history, right? Armor hacks came a little bit after Delve 2, as the as Manny was saying, like the logistics changes happen. But before that, I just want to delve a little bit into, uh, oddly enough, Delve 2, which is when Band of Brothers ended up collapsing. So there were basically, as we were talking about, there were two main fleet comps. One was sniper battleships. One was brawling battleships, which is just close range battleships with remote armor repair on them, which was the closest thing that Eve had to logistics at the time, because logistic ships didn't have the same bonuses that they do now. They were kind of crappy. No one really saw the point of using them because they'd just rather have another battleship doing damage. That was that was the name of the game in EVE Online. Just more damage. Let's just do that. It's fine. So Delve 2 happens after, about a year after Delve 1. The guys in the north say, you know what, let's do this. Let's do this in earnest again. We've got a better plan. And by now, PL has more refined tactics, right? They take long range sniper hacks. They're very annoying to deal with. They've grown. They've got Black Omega Syndicate. They've got Blue Labs. They've got a bunch of other groups involved with them, and so they're a more defined alliance. They have an identity. They've taken part in an alliance tournament. They got close, and they really have started to focus on um, the theory crafting aspect of the game, coming up with fits that other people might not appreciate, or might not know how to respond to. And so that's where they start making their bread and butter. We can kind of push the fast forward a little button because PL didn't play like this huge role in Delve 2, though Shadu and oddly enough Gobbins played a massive role in making sure that the northern forces had an advantage, uh, FC wise, and just being really annoying and just never backing down even after losses. So PL ends up winning Delve 2 with the northern forces. Should be said that the northern forces win Delve 2, and PL are around for the victory parade. And then they start to celebrate. They start to kind of get into their first little golden age, where they kind of become like the flavor of the month group. People start looking at them a little bit more seriously. They're like, oh man, these guys are actually really good at the game. And this is kind of where I come in. I was in a group at the time. It was called Slacker Industries Zero Mortis. In Delve 1, we were part of the GBC, the Greater Bob Community is what it was called. Um, and so we were allies. History has it written as we were pets, but at the time we felt like we were allies. And so in Delve 1, I didn't really partake at all, right? I was just some guy that showed up to a fleet every once in a while, didn't really know what was going on, saw some big ships, was like, wow, this is cool, blah, 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 we won, yay, whatever. In Delve 2, I had my group had kind of moved about a little bit, and I had been involved. I become involved in an ally of Pandemic Legion. I couldn't get into PL at the time because my stats weren't good enough. Oddly enough, they were like, I didn't know anyone in PL, so I had to join a group that was kind of blue to PL, and we're kind of like latching onto them a little bit, and kind of like trying to join their fleets, trying to make a name for ourselves.
So you went from a Bob pet to a PL pet? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically.
Right
yeah.
on. Okay.
But I did it in like the best way, right? So I did it after Bob had won Delve 1. And then I swapped sides before Delve 2. So I won both Delve 4s, right? Or I was on the winning side of both Delve.
So you just hit a really important point. So, like a good EVE Online player, I watched Elise's thing at FanFest last year where he talked about like the history. And, you guys started, or, PL was started as like a minor protection group, but your stats weren't good enough. And that was actually a really important thing back then, right? Because that is how you kind of knew someone, right? Which is like kill board was kind of like how much was killed, how much was destroyed, because it wasn't a really huge community, but people had different alts. So you don't know who anyone is. So, a random Joe, kind of applying, the only real way of knowing, how good they are or what they do is by looking, at their stats, right? Like is looking at their kind of kill board. And it
Yeah.
really did matter, back then. And that I know it kind of, gets a lot of crap from everyone, including us, but back then, like that was like, who are you again? Let me look you up, right? So you not having, those kind of stats was because, you weren't really focused on PvP back then, right? Like,
Yeah, when I was first starting, like I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And obviously, like a very similar story to how a lot of people first started. They started, then they stopped. They start, then they stop. They start, and then they get the hook, right? So my hook is, in my own history, is I joined a group called Xero Mortis, right? And ended up joining their feeder corp, and they were pirates. They said, "Hey, new guy, take this griffin, and you can just jam bad guys that we're fighting." And I was like, "Okay." Then they were like, okay, take this blackbird, take this falcon, take this rook, and it kind of just went up from there. And eventually, I kind of grew from the feeder corp into the main corp, and did a whole bunch of other stuff, and then I moved on to another um, kind of larger group that was allied with PL. Then eventually, I snuck into PL of that first time, and that was a pretty great thing. But you mentioned, Ron, like that's all we had to gauge whether or not you were quote unquote good at the game, or a PvPer, is to look at your kill board. And there wasn't like a single universal kill board back then. There was no Z kill. There was
Was
Eve
it
kill. There
Battle
was
Clinic?
Battle Clinic. Yeah. So there was Eve kill, which is kind of like uh, the the ancestor to Z kill in a way. And then there was Battle Clinic, but not everyone was linked, right? So as a PvPer back then, it was a lot of people actually had their own personal kill boards, and it was a lot of like cross posting all the kills. It was like super important to get your kills on your own kill board. So if you swapped corpse, you would still have like a record of all your kill boards and stuff like that, and all your kills. And in the beginning, if you were trying to join a group, they would say, okay, well, to prove that you get the game, come up with a fit for me. Like, what fit would you take for a battleship? Because there was no homogenous fit that everyone used for everything. So you'd be like, oh shit, I'd have to make this own fit that can fit with my skills. And it was like, I remember my very first time I had to come up with a fit for a long range zealot fit, because that was the flavor of the month, really, type roaming doctrine, right? It was either you were in a nano ship or you were in a long range hack, which was essentially just a glass cannon hack with long range weapons that would engage at like 80 kilometers and kite. So I remember like the very first time I came up with the zealot, and I had to ask my friend, I was like, hey man, is this zealot fit right? And they'd be like, oh shit, man, if you applied with this zealot fit, you would never get in. Make sure to make these changes. So I did. But yeah, eventually I snuck my way into PL from the group that was blue to them, and that's when PL ended up kind of really, really coming into their own. They absorbed some other really good groups. Triumvirate at the time was kind of like the creme de la creme of the small gang PvPer. But they had their own issues. So the joke back then was that Triumvirate were probably the best PvPers in the game, but they were so unstable and filled with so many prima donnas that every few months they would just they would just collapse for some reason, and they would just have to their alliance would die, people would scatter, and then someone would rebuild it, and then this same old would happen. So kind of the moons aligned as PL had won in Delve. Two, they kind of looked over towards Fountain. They had gotten a bunch of swagger, and they were fighting the guys that lived in Fountain at the time, called Brutally Clever Empire. And Brutally Clever Empire, or Bruce, as they were well known, or as they were known as then, were, I don't know the best way to describe them, but they were super passionate. What they lacked in skill, they made up for in passion, right? So they would take some goofy fleet comps. They wouldn't really know how to fight long range hacks. They wouldn't really know how to fight vagabonds or whatever, but they'd show up to defend their space no matter what. And PL ended up, and this was the first time that they've ever done it. They accidentally killed an alliance by fighting them. And so, they were just kind of hanging around the area. They would base out of Syndicate, they'd roam into Fountain, or they'd base out of Iridia and roam into Fountain. And eventually the guys in Brutally Clever Empire were just like, okay, we can't take this anymore. Where these guys keep escalating, we concede. Our space is done. So Pandemic Legion suddenly had this like bunch of space, and we're like, shit, what do we do with this? At the time, there was the big way to make income. It was very much a top-down income stream. You would have these moons that would be very valuable. You would mine the resources of the moon, and control of the moon was, quite important to have. And at the time, the moons, which made Tech 2 materials, the most important material was promethium and dysprosium, something that Delve had in abundance. But also, for some reason, so did Fountain. It actually had the largest concentration of promethium moons, uh, more or less, than any region in the game. So PL were like,
Why was that, Elise? Was there something that people liked? What was created out of those? Do you know? Like, why was that such
so
in high demand?
it was, I don't want to say an accidental bottleneck, but they were considered rare elements, which they still exist in the game, right? It's the base components for what ends up becoming a Tech 2 ship. But I think someone screwed up when designing it. So promethium and dysprosium were very much a bottleneck, and so they were quite pricey. We're talking like 300,000 a unit, and you would mine 100 units every hour per moon. And at the time, again, a huge amount of money involved in that.
So is this the time when the Technetium OTEC was happening, where that cartel was there, or is this predating that?
This is predating that. So before Technetium was the big bad moon goo type thing, it was promethium and dysprosium. What ended up happening is CCP balanced that, and it ended up creating a new bottleneck in Technetium, but there was a little bit more of it, so it wasn't nearly as bad. And then they kind of redid the whole system and added alchemy. But this was before that, so promethium, dysprosium, the big thing. The North had a bunch of it. Pandemic Legion kind of fell into it in Fountain, and kind of moved around. And just to say how massive it was to have these moons, Pandemic Legion started making dread caches. So in order to defend their moons, PL would jump clone whenever there was a timer. They would jump clone over to where they needed to. They would take, uh, 300 dreads, and they'd just have this dread slugfest, which is, we could probably spend an entire episode talking about the meta back then. But the way fights happen a lot of the times was over these moons. If you talk to anyone that's played Eve for like 5 to 10 years, they'll probably have a few rose-colored glasses on what it was like. You could basically guarantee yourself a fight if you reinforced one of these money moons. Guarantee 100%, because they were worth so much. So you'd reinforce a moon in 1 day, 17 hours later, which was the max strong timer. You would 100% have a fight because everyone wanted these moons. And so PL in Fountain ended up amassing 80 of these moons, making tons of money, not knowing what to do. And they decided, hey, you know what? We're just going to plant our flag here. We're going to put some stations down. We are now, instead of a nomadic roaming alliance, we're a nomadic roaming alliance that also lives in Fountain.
So, Manny, I have a quick question because you were already FCing, right? And you were already kind of, at that kind of top tier, skill, strategy level, sort of thinking a lot bigger than most of the players. Uh, what was FCing like back then, right? Because you didn't have the kind of intel networks that you have now. And the other thing, is like, how did like the line members treat you, and how did leadership treat you? Like, did they treat you like, you are a primo kind of content maker, or were they, like, I'm kind of curious, like, how it was back then.
So I don't think the term content maker actually ever got used back then. FCs were basically gods. Back in those days, before the modern day alliances, which kind of Goonswarm ushered in with um, people like Vilerat bringing statecraft to Eve Online. Um, it was alliances were more tribal war chiefs back in the day. That's the type of mentality that most leaders generally were or had. So yeah, FCs were gods, and FCing was definitely uh, much more simpler back then. There was a lot more fog of war. Uh, you didn't have as many intel sources. You generally had just good old fashioned scouts that would go get eyes on this or that, and you'd play off that fog of war and just try to like hope that you made the best choice. And yeah, so it was much more simpler. These days, you have spies feeding you intel, you have scouts, you're looking at multiple like um, sources of intel from like ESI and etc. Your multiple comms, coordination channels, discords, etc., etc. So yeah, this was back in those days. It was very, very basic. Uh, a lot of any coordination that took place usually was via text. Um, it was a very different experience as an FC back then.
So, like, what was the role of a fleet commander? If, like, were broadcasting targets a thing? You didn't have fleet comps necessarily. Did you anchor up? What did fleet commanders do?
Uh, FC generally would like position you on grid, line you to a point. There was never anchoring or anything like that. Um, and then the FC would call the targets. There wasn't even broadcasting back in the day, so you had to have the FC would tell you to sort your overview by alphabet or by distance or by ship type, and that would be pre-established before the fight started, and then the FC would start calling targets, and he would be keeping track of how you're trading versus how many losses you're incurring versus how many you're inflicting, and telling tackle and things, what he wants them to do, scouts where they need to be, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, FCs literally did everything back then, right? So as an FC, and Manny's probably downplaying himself, but Manny was one of like the big FCs in that area of EVE Online. He was very much a rock star, right? So everyone he was more. I don't want to say he was a household name, but a lot of people knew anyone that PvP'd kind of knew who he was, and that's how you felt about a lot of FCs. So the FCs would call the targets, anchor the fleet, come up with a strategy, come up with a ship type to take, decide the target to go after, decide the target to defend. They would literally just do everything. They were the entire military wing um, of an alliance or of a corporation. Uh, there was very little like, oh, you're gonna help me with this. They were like some of the best FCs. They also were the scouts. They were the probers themselves. They had the eyes themselves. Uh, they were, moving the fleet around, doing the fleet warps, doing the links, doing everything at the same time.
So why was that though? Was it just like you didn't have anyone to delegate to because of skills, or like or didn't cross your mind? Like why was he all in one wonder?
So I think it's just like anything with humans. We tend to, the longer we do something, the more we like streamline it, like dissect it and make it more efficient. Um, this goes back to what we were talking with, like the old battleship fits back in the day. There was no grouped weapons, none of that stuff. When you try to join a corporation, it would scrutinize your losses, look at your fits, and be like, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's doing because he's not fitting the ship in a certain way, or et cetera, et cetera. Uh, there was it was kind of like the Wild West back then. You There wasn't a lot of organization or sources of information to tell you how to do things. You just kind of asked a friend, Maybe looked at some more famous Eve pilots and try to emulate what they did. But yeah, very little structure. Uh, yeah, it was just very, very different. And uh, as we've went along through time, we've all chipped away at the fog of war. We've chipped away at uh, the difficulties to be organized and be effective. And that's where you see more scouts and things like spies and fleet comps and IT infrastructure and diplomats and all the things that, like, ship replacement programs. That's if you don't have a ship replacement program, well, what are you doing? Uh, Back in the day, nobody had ship replacement programs.
I think around 2010 is kind of where all of this stuff really starts to change, right? So I was talking about when PL started taking Fountain. That was around 2009, 2008, 2009 after Delve 2. What ends up happening is PL plants her flag in Fountain. And we'll fast forward a little bit because I realize that we're spending a lot of time on some of these things and we're not even halfway through it. So PL plants her flag in Fountain. Band of Brothers comes back. They say, you know what, we were embarrassed. We got a new group called what were they? Kenzoku, I think that was what they're called.
IT.
Oh, right. So yeah, Kenzoku was before that. So IT Alliance. That's their new banner that they all unite under. A lot of the old leaders come back, and a lot of those guys rejoin. They say, you know what? We've got something to prove. We're gonna start taking some space again, and they go to war, right? And their first eye is Pandemic Legion sitting in Fountain with all these money moons, because you make so much money on them. So IT comes back, PL gets curb stomped. No allies really come to help too much, but there are some every now and then, but not all the time. Um, you have a big fight in Y-2 ANO, which is probably at the time one of the biggest fights on the cluster that in the history of the game. Uh, PL decide, you know what, we're gonna jump in to save this system. It was decided like, yo, this is where we're gonna have a big fight. Completely like the server just can't take it, right? Black screens. If you think tie-dye is bad, imagine clicking jump for all your ships and then everyone just materializing in system for one group and not materializing for the other one. So, PL just get utterly dumpstered. They lose Fountain. Morale starts to go awry. They've picked up all these components from all these PvP groups. And kind of like there's victim blame, or not victim, there's like finger pointing. People are saying, "Oh, you're not pulling your weight. The reason we lost was you." And then everyone's mad when they lose, right? No one likes to be on the losing side, and PL were just utterly embarrassed. So Seamus, the executive of Pandemic Legion, says, "Okay, Del or Fountain, obviously we lost here. Let's regroup into Losec." Where we kind of went to Losec for a while, and then we eventually ended up in Geminate, NPC Geminate, in the system FDZ Dash. And the idea was, you know what we're going to do is we're going to, wormholes were a brand new mechanic. And so Seamus was like, okay, I've got this idea. We're going to install these wormhole upgrades and wormhole generators. And then what we're going to do is we're going to base in this system in Geminate, and we're going to use these wormholes to go all over the universe. Which you're talking about something in 2009 that really didn't take hold until 2017 in terms of a playstyle. So this is how much of a visionary Seamus was in terms of understanding the Eve meta and just theory crafting. He was still is an incredibly bright guy, and so this was the plan. Unfortunately, all the best plans sometimes have a little bit of failures. The idea to create these wormhole things, it didn't work because the wormhole generators themselves weren't coded properly, so they never increased the spawn rate of of the wormholes. So Pandemic Legion goes from being the top dogs in space to living in shame in Geminate, trying to get these wormholes to work, and it never does. So after a few months, not even a few months, a few weeks, corps get kicked out of PL for creating drama. My corp being one of them. My corp was also the one that had Graf Telkin in it, and a lot of the FCs were in it. So what ended up happening is the FCs split along more or less time zone lines. Grath went to Sniggerly because he was kind of poached by Seamus. A lot of the other groups went into Northeastern SWAT, which was Shadoo's Corp. And then my group, we went over to play with Cry Havoc and Losec because Cry Havoc was the closest thing we had to something that Pandemic Legion was. So Pandemic Legion really falls on dark times. You're talking about fleets of like 5 or 10 people, maybe. If you could get those things up, the wormhole thing was up and down, but not really working too much. People didn't really have the same understanding. There was no wormhole mapping, so a lot of it was done in Excel, and it was just a disaster, right? So it's basically the darkest hour of Pandemic Legion. Everyone in EVE Online is under the assumption that Pandemic Legion's finally dead. What a great flash in the pan they were! Really fun guys, but much like Triumvirate, these elite PvPers don't know what they're doing. And then, like a magical figure, eventually, Shadoo comes back. And this is what Manny was talking about. This is kind of the time in EVE where an understanding of the game becomes really, really good because Pandemic Legion were theory crafting, or at least a member of Pandemic Legion at the time, Black Horizon, was theory crafting the new hotness, which after the change to logistics came out, it was signature tanking. So the idea of instead of tanking with raw EHP, if you're just a really small target, nobody hits you, and if nobody hits you, you can tank a lot. Little signature, high resist profile, and combine it with these logistic ships, and that became armor hacks. So Shadoo came out. He returned to PL after taking a break. He took a break after Delve 2 and skipped over Fountain because he was just completely burned out. And he comes back to PL and he doesn't really recognize anyone, right? Well, he recognizes people, but he doesn't recognize the alliance that he left. He was like, well, I left you at the top of your game. You guys are wallowing in this shitty area. Let's take out these ships and see what happens. And in that summer, PL ends up just going off. This is the summer of 2010. Alliance tournament. I want to say Alliance tournament 8, maybe. This is when it is. Pandemic Legion wins full out. They have these armor hacks with them. They're taking EVE by storm. They aren't the first group to use armor hacks. That kind of goes to a group called SOT, a Russian group that were using Ishtars at the time. But PL like really refines the idea. They take these armor hacks, they start killing capital ships, they start doing nut stuff, and then everyone that left starts coming back. They say, okay, well, this Shadoo guy is, no laughing matter. He's got this swagger back, and PL hit another golden age. And so everyone comes back. PL gets a bunch of moons. They start doing fun stuff. And then that 8-man fleet goes up to 30-man fleets, goes up to 60-man fleets, and eventually PL is back at full strength and even stronger.
Did you guys move back into nullsec, or did you take just moons and lowsec for your income? Where were you living during this golden age?
So at the time, PL were still living in FTZ, and they were going over to the Russian groups to the right. They're fighting old allies in the north. They were just fighting basically any target of opportunity that they could. The idea wasn't to conquer space. It was mostly just to rebuild that type of swagger and momentum to get them back into a place where they could then take moons and then become a powerhouse again. Not necessarily like a space owning powerhouse, but just a PvP powerhouse.
Yeah, and just to emphasize the importance of armor hacks and Shadoo's return, PL literally beat everybody on the server. They went up and fought the NC, just wiped their fleets. They went down south, they fought IT, wiped their fleets. I was leading AAA at the time. I can remember leading a full battleship fleet, Tech 2, like pristine, and I would gauge myself semi-competent at running sniper battleship fleets, and they destroyed me. And it was so bad that I was like, "What just happened? I don't understand this." And it was brutal. Like everybody on the entire server was just in fear and awe of the terrifying might of PL and these armor hacks.
And people didn't really understand the entire concept, right? So it's something that we theorized, or that a few of us theorized and refined. But like on paper, it doesn't seem that good, right? You're trading these 200k EHP battleships for these 20k EHP hacks, and you're like, well, what are these things going to do? And nobody really thought of like webbing ships to, or no one really had the idea to bring a lot of webbing ships, because that's eventually how you end up countering armor hacks. But it took Eve a long time to say, wow, holy shit, like we need to do this. People tried to emulate it, but they didn't quite get it, so they put micro warp drives on their hacks. Micro warp drives increased the signature balloon by 600%. So obviously that didn't work. So it was very much like just people didn't know what to do.
Well, yeah, I
And
mean you're using these low sig ships against long range battleship guns. It's pretty much a direct counter to that, right? Especially if you get
yeah,
on
and
top of it.
even long range, even close range battleships, because that was more or less the meta, was either you're taking a battleship or you're not, and so it was a close range battleship or a long range battleship, and neither could really touch these AHACs, right? And so PL had this, they were just moving all around the server. They spent some time in the south. They helped what then became the initiative take space in the south. They went over. They fought in drone lands a little bit. They fought the north a little bit. And so eventually PL like really gets their swagger back. They win an alliance tournament, which I think is their becomes their second or third one in a row. And they really feel good about where they are in Eve Online. And other things are happening in the game. The IT Alliance is kind of coming back. They want vengeance against what is the Northern Coalition. Uh, so they start hammering on the Northern Coalition. The Northern Coalition isn't really ready for it. And so Pandemic Legion, under the guidance of Fintroll, Billy the Mercenary, Billy Merc, formerly of Goonswarm, also in Pandemic Legion, he goes to Vuklau, who is the leader of the entire Northern Force, and says, yo, I see that you guys are getting hammered up here in the north by IT. We really can't do anything about that. Together we can't really take them on too well. We just don't have the capital assets to do it. But if you give us this giant sack of money, we will deploy and we will be your guys. We will be your mercenaries. We will burn their space to the ground faster than they can burn your space to the ground, and then they'll have to retreat to take care of home, or they'll have to split their forces to deal with us. And so Vuklau goes, okay, how much are you thinking? And Finchel says, just flat out, 600 billion ISK, an unheard of number. It's like, uh, not unheard of, but it's very much like in Austin Powers when Dr. Evil goes, $1 trillion. Like it felt like that type of moment. And so Vuklau was like, okay, whatever. We're the biggest group on the server. We've got all the resources. We got all the swag. Sure, PL, take this money. If it works, you can have that 600 bill. So PL then deploys to Delve on their first ever mercenary contract, completely burn Delve to the ground. IT Alliance has to bounce back because they're just losing way too much. And that invasion into the north is completely called off. PL gets that sack of money. The Northern Coalition's like, wow, holy shit, I can't believe that worked. And then PL in earnest become these mercenaries. And so we kind of just spend the next year roaming around the server, shooting people that we want, deploying quite quickly, in and out. So then a few things happen in the north, and kind of the time frame for all this is a little bit stacked and going back a little bit, but just to make it a little bit more easy, the group in the north ends up fighting the drone Russians in what they don't classify as an invasion. They just want to fight someone, and the closest people to fight are the people in the drones. the drone Russian Federation, who had hired PL to defeat Atlas and take up that space over there. They used it was just like PL's second contract, which was a big thing. The drone Russians were like, holy shit, these guys want to invade our livelihood. So all of the drone Russians banded together under one banner. They called themselves the Drone Russian Federation, which included XIX, Solar, all of the big names, Red Alliance, and White Noise, and they moved a super fleet that EVE Online had never seen before. Like no one knew where these guys came from, but they kind of just planted their flag on the map and said, you know what, we're not going to take this anymore. And they declared war on the Northern Coalition. And Pandemic Legion, who had worked with both groups, said, you know what, Vuklau, we've been friends with you for a longer time. If you give us the money, we'll do that same thing we did against Band of Brother or against IT Alliance when they were invading you before. And Vuklau and the Northern Coalition, a little bit on hubris, said, nah, we don't need that. So Pandemic Legion walked over to the other side and say, hey, DRF, you know what we do. We've worked together before. Together we took down Atlas. We got you your space. We gave you like a place to grow. And they said, and this was X-Death, he said, yeah, we'll give you literally whatever you want. If you lose a super, we'll replace it. If you lose a Titan, we'll replace it. If you lose battleships, we'll replace them, and we'll give you this giant sack of money, even bigger than you had before. We'll double your previous fee of 600 billion to 1.2 trillion, and obviously SRP for any ship that you lose. And so PL were more or less gobsmacked. And this is when I kind of became, I moved from like a C tier FC to a B tier FC, I guess. And so, yeah. And so what ends up happening, and I could literally just spend hours talking about this one war, this one conflict, because it's my favorite in EVE Online. I think it's more fun than World War B. It's more fun than Delve 2.
It was magical.
It was just this great time for me. But what ends up happening is Pandemic Legion and the DRF, they roll over the Northern Coalition and they stop right at the border to Declan, which is where Goonswarm were living. And then the DRF pull back. Pandemic Legion ends up becoming, working with other groups at the time, because DRF, they were super wealthy, and they realized that they needed every advantage they could get fighting the biggest, baddest guys. So they also hired what ended up being Northern Coalition Dot and Evoke, three groups that were very similar in size to PL, very similar scope. And this is kind of where the medium gang or medium-sized alliance really thrived. And so they said, okay, you guys work together, split the resources however you want. We don't care what you do. Just wreak havoc on their backlines while we're fighting this war over here. And then when we have these big timers, you guys can show up to help us push the tides. And so that's exactly what happened. Pandemic Legion and Northern Coalition began to work together for the very first time. They became really close. And I think we've kind of been working together ever since. And together we split up all of the money moons that the North had, basically between us. We took the ones at Venal. They took the ones in Tribute and a little bit over to the east. And it just the Northern Coalition died. Pandemic Legion and Northern Coalition, and now we're in the north with these Technetium moons. Blah blah blah. Dysprosium and Promethium got balanced. That was no longer a bottleneck, but Technetium became the new bottleneck. And all of the Technetium, like 70% of the Technetium in the game, was solidified in the north. For some reason, we don't really know why. It just happened to be that way. All these Technetium moons are in the north. Pandemic Legion is now in Venal and NPC systems, and they have 90 of these moons. Northern Coalition.
Should really quickly clarify, Northern Coalition, the coalition was the people who lost this war. Northern Coalition Dot is the alliance that is now living in the space. Exactly. The dot is important.
The dot, it's basically a middle finger to the Northern Coalition, right? They just took the name, added a dot to it to mock them. And a lot of those people are former IT Alliance and just other people that played the game. So yeah, Northern Coalition Dot conquered the Northern Coalition with the DRF and PL, and ended up taking their space and all their money moons. And this is, if we talk about PL in a golden age, this is the golden age on overdrive, because all these money moons that could sustain the largest alliance in the game are now going split between two relatively small alliances. Because the DRF, they were like, well, we don't care about these money moons, we don't care about the space, we just wanted them gone. So the DRF, after they hit Declan, they say, we're done with this, and they kind of move on back. And this is about the time where Goonswarm, they also hit their golden age, right? If we want to talk a little bit about history, they were part of an alliance called the Clusterfuck Coalition. They created an alliance called the Clusterfuck Coalition, and they took a lot of the people that were evicted from the Northern Coalition, and they said, "Hey guys, you're free to join here, but this is how we do things. We have this organizational structure, unlike what you're used to. You can't just take any ship you want. You have to take this exact ship." Because Goonswarm kind of understood the the just how Eve was moving. They realized that you can't just take whatever ship you wanted anymore. You need homogenous fleet doctrine. So they had arguably, depending on who you ask, one of the best FCs in the game. I think if you ask people who they think the best FC is uh, in the game, or at least in the modern era, they'll say either Shadu or Mr. V. Shadu was from PL, Mr. V was from Goonswarm. And so Mr. V, he understood, very similar to Shadu, that you need homogenous fleet doctrines. He understood how to deal with all this. And so then you really have Goonswarm creating what ends up being the Imperium on the heels of this. So, but that's a different story that we can talk about later. So now PL is in this golden age overdrive. Win another alliance tournament. They have all this money. All these guys are getting, since we have an entire massive group's worth of income into such a small group of people, a lot of the members are getting super capitals. Just rich beyond anything you can imagine for a group their size. And again, they have all the swag in the world.
And what year are we in, roughly speaking, here?
This is 2011, give or take.
Yeah, 2011. Should also mention, during this time, strategic cruisers become a thing in EVE Online. Well, like maybe a year before that or so. And PL creates this doctrine called, what did we call them?
Thundercats. Yeah, it was as Seamus, the executive PL at the time, his parting gift to Pandemic Legion before he went on to retirement is he theory crafted an armor hack type ship, but even better. And it was a Tengu. It was a strategic cruiser, which were relatively new to the game. No one kind of used them. Like, they came out when wormholes came out, obviously, but nobody really used them besides wormholers because no one saw the allure.
And they were extremely expensive, and you lost skill points when you lost them.
Yeah, so they were like, well, the idea was, well, these would just be all solo, small gang stuff, because no one in their right mind would be able to afford an entire fleet of these, because that's insane. And nobody in their right mind would risk losing a fleet of these, because imagine if you lose 100 of these ships, the amount of skill points that you lose as an alliance level is just absurd. So no one really considered them. So Seamus, as he leaves Shadu in charge of Pandemic Legion, his baby, he says, by the way, guys, here's a Tengu fit that can shoot up to 90 kilometers and is basically invulnerable to everything. The one thing that AHACs were really weak against was webs, but there is literally no single platform in the game that can web out to a range larger than these Tengus, except for the Hugin. And as long as you have more than 30 of these Tengus, a Hugin will instantly die because it's too light. And so he goes, good luck, have fun. And he retires. And then, as Manny said, these Tengu strategic cruisers, PL start using because they're now supremely rich, so they can afford it. They have the idea for it, and it's kind of like the AHACs all over again, where people are like, "Oh shit, what do we do? I don't understand. Please send help." And so that's like another a resurgence for PL. So PL then with nothing really left to do, they kind of just bumble around the server. They come up with the concept of that's called rapid deployments, right? So PL move all their assets to a system called Amamake, their cultural homeland. And Shidu says, you know what we're going to do is whenever we want to fight somebody, we're just going to deploy with our carriers and a few super carriers and titans. We're going to deploy to wherever we want using our Sino network, because back then there was no fatigue, so you can go from one end of the galaxy to the other as long as you had a Sino network and fuel. So we're going to do that, and we're going to spend 2 or 3 weeks there, and then we're going to come back, regroup for a little while, and go out again, and just become these nomads based in Amamake. So that's what PL's MO turns into. And this is, I think, around the same time where we kind of go to Delve, and this is where we cross paths with Manny. And that's a really fun era, again, that I could probably talk about for hours, but I know we do have a time constraint on the show, so I don't want to fast forward past it too much, but this is where PL and Manny cross paths. It's a really fun summer. We shoot each other. Manny has drakes, which kill basically everything, because he's got so many of them. And then it just goes back and forth. And I guess we make an impression on Manny, and we end up, poaching Manny after we kind of lay waste to the airspace that he was in. And Manny is a huge asset for PL. And he does some theory crafting. He creates slow cats. He leads
Oh God,
campaigns.
I
Yeah,
I'm
love
he
the
waiting
breaks.
till we
physical
bring up
reaction to
slow
those
cats.
damn things.
He breaks
Jesus
Eve.
Christ.
Manny literally breaks Eve and changes how the game is played, um, just because that's what Manny does. So PL bumbles around. We pick up Manny. We pick up some other people, and then Manny. I don't even remember exactly what we do. We end up killing we end up killing a group off in the drone lands and taking over their space and creating a rental program there to help
Yep.
augment our money. And we're still kind of just roaming around. And then we kind of help out some guys in the south. We help out Test. Shadoo's last real campaign as an FC and EVE Online is he's got his eyes on wanting to destroy the Southern Coalition, which is AAA, Nali Secunda. Actually, I don't think Nali Secunda are with them anymore, but it's AAA and some other groups, but mostly AAA in the South. So we team up with Test, and we kind of go out and we create what's called the Money Badger Coalition. Nope, Honey Badger Coalition. Yeah. And Manny, you're around for the Money Badger Coalition or Honey Badger Coalition, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah. And so this is when you become like super active in PL, and you you kind of rise to the very top of PL and become more or less like the the pilot of the ship.
so yeah, we basically roll over AAA and Stainwagon with Test, and it was a grind, but Shadoo and just powered through it. There at the end, PL was so burnt out that you would maybe get like 40 PL in fleet, and Shadoo just sucked it up and would bring Test into PL fleets and make the best of the situation and just got it done. And what Elise had alluded to, he's on the backside of the NC war with a contract where the Drone Region Federation took the North. After that, uh, White Noise kind of dissolved, and XIX, which was Legion of Death, and Solar had a falling out. And Solar was more military focused. Whereas Legion of Death was more casual, friendly. So when they came to blows, Solar, who were extremely focused, got the better of Legion of Death, and they started losing territory. And UEX Death contacted PL and hired us to come up to the drones and equalize the situation. And so we went up and we fought solar, and we ended up taking most of drone regions, and XDEF didn't want most of it. And we already had Technetium, but we were like, well, more money is not bad, right? So PL and NC Dot made an alliance called Brothers of Tangra, and took a lot of space in the drones and made a riddle empire out of it. It was around this same time the biggest threat of a fleet comp. Goons were using maelstroms, arty maelstroms, and they were just laying waste to fleets that were fighting them. They utilized Hugans and very tanked out, and they always had a lot of them in fleets. So armor hacks and things like that didn't work so well against them. And that's kind of where what led me to make Slow Cats. I needed a fleet comp that could fight them with PL's numbers, which we usually, like on a big fleet, we get 100, 120 in fleet. So needed something that could take on their arty maelstroms and survive the alpha. And that's kind of where Slow Cats came from.
For the listener who's unfamiliar, what is a slow cat?
Slow Cat was
Evil? They're evil. That's everything is evil from this point forward, just so you guys know. Yeah, go ahead, please, man.
so Slow Cat was an Archon or an armor carrier at first, with a focus on Archon, and tank to the max. And we would deploy sentry drones. And back then, you could assign drones to someone, and then whenever the person that assigned the drones aggressed something, all the drones that were assigned to would shoot. So effectively, you would have perfect alpha. These drones would all shoot in the same server tick as each other. Now, one sentry drone doesn't do a lot of damage, but when each carrier is putting out 10 and then you have 100 of these carriers, they're doing a lot of damage. And to make situations worse, at the time, carriers could remote rep each other with capital sized remote reps that repped very well. So these things were just basically giant armor plates that could dish out damage to 140, 150 kilometers whilst tanking pretty much anything that you could throw at it. They were unstoppable.
And this is also when there was no jump fatigue. So if you had the Sinos, you could get anywhere in, well, the Sinos and the cap recharge. You could get anywhere in Eve.
We would be in Amamaki, there would be a fight somewhere or an objective somewhere. We'd form, 20 minutes later we would be there and be wreaking havoc. And then Stainwagon made a resurgence. This is after Shiddu's final sunset cruise that he made a resurgence, and they started to attack NC Dot's Renal Empire. Back then it was called the N3. It was NC Dot, Noli Secunda, some other alliances, and the CFC joined in into the fray on the side of AAA and Stainwagon. And NC Dot was facing insurmountable odds, and so I made the appeal to the rest of the alliance, or at least to Elise and the rest of the alliance leadership, that these are our friends, and we kind of have to go try to help them out in whatever way we can. So PL moves to Curse and takes up arms in trying to help defend NC Dot against the CFC and Stainwagon and AAA. And it led to the largest fight, or the bloodiest fight in EVE Online, called B-R5. and which we lost. Oops. But it was very exciting. Along the way, the slow cats morphed from slow cats to the wrecking ball, and that was in direct response to the CFC. They figured out one of the best ways to fight us was to use cheap, inexpensive ships with their newer pilots, which they had an abundance of, to prevent the slow cats from remote repping each other by sensor dampening them, by jamming them, things like this. So my next solution was to use super carriers as the logistics for the slow cats, because super carriers at the time were completely immune to electronic warfare. You couldn't jam them, you couldn't sensor dampen them, and furthermore, Titans were getting used more and more in fights. You could fit them with tracking and make them hit subcaps pretty decently. This is before hog guns and things like that. But the problem was every time you'd bring them onto the field, they would bounce. You'd have one bounce a couple 100 kilometers. The very first major fight of the Halloween War, a burning Titan piloted by a guy by the name of Satan bounced like 400, 500 kilometers. We spent 8 hours extracting that one single Titan, and the battlefield was just a trail of wrecks for that 500 kilometers, of where we would have to jump in new slow cats closer to where the Titan was, and they would just keep bouncing it further and further away. So with some testing, we figured out that if we jump Titans into a ball of super carriers and slow cats, they would collide with those slow cats and super carriers and come to a rest and not go flying off into space. And we could effectively deploy them without the whole messy affair of then having to like chase one that's bouncing away. So yeah, B-R happens. There was a bug. Some people say I didn't pay the sub bill. I say I did. And Sav drops in B-R, where PL is staged. It's in MNCA. And the Russians decided, you know what, PL's assets are in this station that they don't have Sav for. We're going to go in and take this station, because you can just shoot it down to 0 HP and it becomes your station, effectively locking PL out of their own station where all our gear is stored. Plant our TCU, which is how you claim the system, the SAV, and effectively cut PL out of the war and cut them off from their assets. I panic. I'm several regions away with a slow cat fleet battling to save Sav up in drone regions. I have to rush back. By the time I get back, they've got the station bubbled. They've got forces deployed. And in the back of my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, all of our stuff's trapped in the station. What have I done? I've really put my alliance in a bad spot. I need to fix this. So I work my tried and trusted slow cats on a grid and some Titans and super caps, and then the battle happens. And for the next 23 hours, carnage ensues that has never been experienced in any video game anywhere. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And I'll let Elise kind of fill in some gaps now.
Well, so the one of the coolest things about EVE Online is the storylines that you invariably come across. And one of the funnier or more interesting storylines of the Halloween War that Manny's talking about is, at the time, there's an FC that's relatively well known. Actually, I shouldn't say relatively well known. He's incredibly well known. He's a member of the CFC, and he's sort of he's one of the main guys in charge of the CFC deployment into the Halloween War down south to help the Russians, which is more or less a proxy war for um, for the CFC. I think they may be going by the Imperium now. I'm not entirely sure. But either way, he's a guy by the name of Villy. And so Villy is a member of is one of the main members of the CFC, and he comes up with this concept for beating Manny's slow cats. And the idea is called Omega Fleet, which is I'm just getting a bunch of Titans, or not a bunch of Titans, a bunch of Naglfars with Artie Fit. I'm just gonna, you guys can't rep through me. So, or you guys can rep through me, but you can't rep through a bunch of these Naglfars all firing at once. We'll just start alphaing carriers. And so that was his plan. And a few days before BTAC-R, he and his allies, they kind of do a dry run on this. There's a fight in Head GP, and the CFC and the Russians together. They're like they had this little plan, this little cheese pocket strategy in their back pocket. And they're like, okay, when they do this, we're gonna take these dreads out and we're gonna start popping people, and then we'll show them like how it's done. So in Head GP, we have PL has a slow cat fleet out with NC Dot, and the Russians are kind of in Stainwagon. They're kind of feeling the pressure of the campaign. It's going really slow. It's not as big of a stomp as it once was in the beginning. Now that PL is there, and Manny's kind of commanding over all time zones, and making sure nobody really loses anything stupidly. So there's no low hanging fruit. So the Russians go, okay, we're gonna take this Omega Doctrine in now. And Villy's like, whoa, 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 we're not ready for this. This is dumb. Maybe you shouldn't do this so much. And the Russians jump in. And so Villy's like, well, shit, now we have to go in too. So Villy takes his group and they jump in as well against what he wants to do. And turns out the server can't handle that because it wasn't on a reinforced node. And that entire coalition loses something like 700 Naglfars. And it's like, oh shit, this is the fight that ends it all. The the Southern forces and goons. This is like the biggest dread slaughter that we've seen in a long, long, long time, probably more than 5 years. And it's just incredibly decisive. PL and NC lose almost nothing. I think they lose like a disconnected carrier or two, but that's about it. And then these dreads, which never really load. I mean, it's not to say it's a tactical failure by any means. They just never had the chance to do anything, and they just get obliterated. And so everyone kind of doesn't really assume it's over, but it does seem like the wind is out of the sails. And then Nelly Secunda, their rental empire, which kind of butts up against the PL rental empire, they have a disgruntled director who drops all the solve because why not? That's EVE Online. That's how a lot of people started playing this game on the idea of you can abuse trust and you can do stuff like that. So Manny goes to clean up that mess, and he basically reconquers the entire region or the entire set of regions of like hundreds of systems. He does it in like a day and a half somehow. Like just deploys to the other end of space and fixes his backyard. And then the BTAC-R happens. There are some funny storylines there, but the Russians, they don't make the call this time. The call is made by a Goon FC. Villy wasn't available at the time, which I think it's the one thing that he's most mad about in the game, because I think that would have been a feather in his cap that he would have loved, because he did a lot of work setting it up. But Lazarus Telraven, his counterpart in Goon Swarm as well, he makes the call like, fuck it, go in. Going with everything. It's one of those situations that probably we won't see again in EVE, right? It's a scenario where neither side really knows what's going on. No one has perfect information. Everyone has imperfect information. And you've got these two players who just say, you know what, fuck it. I think we both have the advantage here. And both sides firmly believe they have the advantage going in. And that's essentially what happens in BTAC R5. Turns out that the Stainwagon and the CFC, they still have a lot of swagger left, even after their huge whelp like 4 days before. So they come in with everything, end up winning in a huge way, but then end up losing the war hilariously enough. But yeah, so that's one of the funny, interesting storylines of Billy and Manny clashing together, and then they're together again. Which I just the in EVE Online, like single battles are fun, and I kind of remember a lot of single battles and a lot of really good kills. But my favorite part is always the storylines, and just fun storylines like that are things that like stick out to me in my head.
And so this particular storyline, I think we're going to have to cut it short, at least for the time being. It's kind of ridiculous that we thought we could cram this many years of history into a single show. But just sort
I
of
know. I got started early on, and then I was like, "Oh shit!" I looked at the time, and I was like, "Wow, we are 40 minutes in, and we've probably covered space where people still haven't started playing the game yet. Like the average player still hasn't started playing the game yet. So we had to fast forward on something. But yeah, this is the end of World War B. Pandemic Legion still feels pretty good. Or sorry, not the end of World War B. The end of the Halloween War. Pandemic Legion still feels pretty good. Manny, huge campaign commander, making a lot of moves for PL. Um, really, really solidifying himself in the cater of FCs of Eve Online in the history books.
And
Right on.
isn't now Manny? Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the unpaid Sov bill one of the special edition items that's in the game as well?
That's actually from when Cartoon didn't pay the sub bill when Goons held Delve after taking it off of Kinzoku and Banner Brothers. But yeah, I have one of those in my Titan, just because it's funny. But
Yeah.
yeah, what's funny, we only covered a little history of PL, and we've talked for an hour and a half, and it's amazing how many details we just skipped over or omitted to, because we realized we were dragging on too much. But yeah, and so many amazing things. The biggest thing I'd like to say about PL is that golden era that Elise talks about. I've never experienced teamwork uh, and people willing to come together and do things and go the extra mile. Oh, I'm talking. You had Elise that ushered all of us little retards around. Elise and Shadu. And then you had so many actors. I mean, there's me and Elise are here in this channel, but the people that made a difference in PL and that golden era, I don't think this channel could hold all of them. There was just so many people that made a difference that were so impactful and just so awesome to be around and play the video game with.
Right on. I think
That's
that's
fantastic.
it's a good note to end the discussion on. We will finish up because we've talked for an hour and a half so far on all this history, and I still haven't started playing the game yet, so I have no idea what any of us were talking about. Well, maybe Slowcast, but that's because they were still in the game when I started playing. So we'll get up to more modern history sometime in the future, thanks to Manny and Elise. Although it got a bit rambly there, or not rambly. That's the wrong term. We went on some tangents along the way, but they were good tangents. I quite enjoyed it. We're going to transition here really quick, just touch on, there was one highlight we wanted to point out that happened this week, which was that a Vanquisher died. And Ron, you have the details on this particular story, right? Tell us what happened with this Vanquisher.
Yeah, so this is, we have a legacy test has an Astra House on the grid with the O3 Tech 4 Keepstar, which is Winterco's staging Keepstar. And that little Keepstar has been reinforced now, I think, if I remember right, 16 times, because we just defended it again today. And it is just a thorn in the side of Winterco. And what they do, is they'll invite people on the undock into a fleet and then warp them to the Astra House. And they'll have like a bubble underneath the Astra House. They'll warp them to the bubble, fleet warp them to the bubble, and then they'll rebubble, and then they'll use the Astra House to kill it. So, what happened with this was they had a fake standing fleet open, and the Vanquisher pilot joined the fake standing fleet and then undocked. And when he undocked, they fleet warped him below the Astra House, bubbled him, called in dreads, and then just obliterated him. And that happened actually right at the end of Sunday's show, and right right as they were getting ready to end, that the Vanquisher died.
I suppose we should clarify for any listeners unfamiliar. A Vanquisher is a Serpentis, so a pirate faction titan, and it's a bit different from the other ones like the Moloch and the... What's the version of Leviathan? Somebody help me out. In any case,
Komodo.
Komodo, yeah.
I think it's the Komodo.
The faction fake Drake. But in any case, it's different from those because you can get it through the LP store, at least the BPC for it, and it has just got insane build cost for it. So the value is not necessarily determined by rarity and the BPC dropping. The value is determined by just how much this thing costs in minerals to build, plus a bit of LP cost.
Yeah, they're like 400 bill-ish, maybe 400, 450 to 350, depending. And, this is the fourth one that's died in game. So it's kind of like a feather in the cap because if you guys remember, earlier this year, Legacy lost a faction titan as well. And we lost, I think it was a Komodo. And, we've never heard the end of it. So we're just ramping up all of our Vanquisher memes and stuff. So it's 1 for 1 on the faction titan scale.
Although you have lost the only Komodo to die was the Komodo that was lost, and that was just a failed Titan drop, right? If I remember right. So you guys tried to
you bringing that up. Yeah,
jump
that's
in a bunch
great.
of Titans and didn't anticipate the response.
No,
in time?
it was we were actually in a system, and everybody warped off except for him. Like the FC says, a line, or whatever, and he was still there, but he was already starting to get bubbled, and they were going to go back, but he was like, no, don't even attempt it. And that's where that beautiful screenshot that I have on my stream, which is of all of these titans just all doomsdaying it. So yeah, yep, and that's the only one that's died of that.
Right on. Well, we'll definitely be keeping an eye on the Southern Theater. We had a bit of a discussion before the show where Ron is just casually and politely reminding me that they're fighting and they're dropping supers and titans every day. It's like, the irony of the situation is there's so much fighting happening that none of the fighting seems to be newsworthy. It's just, oh, another 50 to 100 billion fight happened, meh. That happens every day. So if anything, like a Vanquisher dying.
1970. It's like, oh yeah, no, the Vietnam War is still happening. But what about Coca-Cola? Like,
yeah, they've come out with this thing. It's called New Coke. You'll never believe it. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Talking in Stations, a history of PL, a pandemic history, if you will, or at least part of it. This is part 1. I guess we're going to have to do a part 2, maybe with some different guests, or who knows, maybe Manny and Elise will definitely make a return. Thanks again to Manfred Sidious and Elise Randolph for joining us today, giving us some insights into the history of a very storied group in EVE Online.
Yeah, thanks for having me. EVE Online history is one of my favorite things. Like I said, what kind of drives me to stick around with this game is just the different storylines that happen. It's not something that happens in any other game that I've ever experienced. So really, really cool to talk about, even though we do get on some tangents. It's just EVE is such a deep and fun game.
The tangents are the best part, though, in my opinion. Like, I had no idea how in the world EVE was played back in 2004. In any case, we're going on too long.
EVE players didn't either.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it as well, and I love talking about EVE history. We all go on about, oh, this is bad about EVE, or this is bad. You hear people complaining, but there's no other game that can deliver what EVE does. There's this guy in PL named Val, and on his bio on the PL forums, he had this sentence, and the sentence was, for those few brief minutes a couple times each year, there's no better game than EVE Online. And in those minutes, yeah, EVE delivers something that can't be duplicated anywhere else, or hasn't been. It's an amazing game.
All right, we'll be back next week, same time, or you can catch us on Sunday at 1600 UTC. Thanks again, guys.